Late afternoon light poured across the pine floors of my Savannah townhouse, catching dust motes that looked like fireworks. Rosemary and garlic drifted from the oven, mingling with the lemon oil I had rubbed into the banister this morning. I had promised myself I would celebrate without apology. I paid every closing cost. I signed every document alone. This was my home. I set tulips in a blue mason jar and checked the doorbell camera. A neighbor waved, then disappeared down the sidewalk. Inside, the playlist hummed low, old standards my father used to whistle when he was gentle. I breathed, holding on to that small memory the way sailors keep a lighthouse in view. The guest list was modest: co-workers who knew my stubborn streak, 2 neighbors, and, because refusing would cause a different war, my parents and my sister. I told myself boundaries could survive a party. In the South, you learn to practice hope with your teeth clenched. I straightened the charcuterie board, felt the smoothness of the counter I sanded myself, and repeated something a mentor once told me: good fences make good neighbors and better families. My phone buzzed with a text from Thane. Proud of you. Lock the door when the sun goes down. I smiled. When the bell rang, I lifted my chin and opened wide. I expected flowers, a pie, maybe a joke about finally choosing roots. Instead, the doorway filled with the people who taught me that niceness can be a weapon. Romilly moved through my living room like a realtor staging a tour, fingertips grazing fabric, eyes measuring square footage that did not belong to her. She set a large tote on the console table and unzipped it with ceremony. Inside were folded towels, a shower caddy, and a framed print of magnolias. Zarel parked 2 suitcases by the hallway and tilted her head toward the stairs. Bastian lifted a box labeled bedroom and waited for instructions like a quiet shadow. Mom, I said, keeping my tone level. What are the bags for? For your guest room, of course, she answered, already halfway down the hall. You really should think about warmer lighting in there. 2 co-workers entered and stalled at the sight of luggage. I flashed an apologetic smile and nudged them kitchenward. The oven chimed. I removed crostini, set the platter down, and willed my hands to steady again. Romilly pushed open the guest room door and flicked on the lamp. Cozy, she announced to no one in particular. But it needs a woman's touch. It has one, I said. Mine. She ignored that. Zarel ran a hand down the banister as though she were testing a railing she had purchased. 2 bedrooms is generous, she said softly, almost to herself. I could use the sunlight in the mornings. My jaw tightened. I steadied my breath and remembered a neighbor's advice when I closed escrow. In this town, you speak politely and plan privately. Tonight, I would do both. By twilight, the room felt warm and loud, the way parties do when everyone talks a little over the music. I topped off glasses, laughed at small jokes, and kept one eye on the hallway. When Romilly tapped her spoon against her glass, the conversations thinned like tide water pulling back. To new beginnings, she said, holding her wine high. And to families sticking together. After all, she glanced at me, freeloaders don't need locks. The line landed with a brittle tinkle of nervous laughter. A neighbor looked at the floor. One of my co-workers froze mid-sip. Zarel added, bright as a porch light. I'll bring life to the place. It suits me. I held my glass steady and chose silence. In our family, the first person to flare loses. I told myself to remember the room. Who laughed, who winced, who changed the subject. People reveal themselves when cruelty is dressed as a joke. Mom, I said finally, tone even. The locks stay. Romilly smiled. Don't be dramatic, darling. You never minded sharing. It's not as if you're home all the time. I work from home 3 days a week, I said, and I mind. She lifted a shoulder, already bored. Temporary arrangements keep families healthy. Healthy families ask, I replied. Bastian coughed, eyes on his shoes. The music resumed, polite as ever. Someone complimented the crostini. I smiled with my face and kept my anger someplace quiet and useful. There is a difference between swallowing pride and banking it. I pivoted back into hostess mode, collecting empty plates while tracking every territorial move. Zarel disappeared into the guest room with her phone flashlight, then re-emerged and placed a small makeup bag on my entry table like a flag. Romilly asked loudly where I kept extra sheets. "Linen closet," I said, and followed, watching her inventory my space with the casual entitlement of someone who believes proximity equals permission. Thane arrived late with a pound cake and a concerned eyebrow. "You good?" he murmured. "Smile for the camera," I whispered back, and looked toward the hallway. He followed my gaze and caught sight of the suitcases. His mouth thinned, but he nodded. We stood near the kitchen island, voices low. "You expecting her to stay?" he asked. "Not in the slightest." "Then tonight you perform grace," he said. "Tomorrow you install consequences." I set a timer on my phone and toured the rooms again, pretending to refresh drinks. Bastian had taken the bedroom box upstairs. I found it opened on my office floor, an assortment of framed photos peeking through tissue paper. My jaw relaxed through effort. I took a quick photo of the scene, then closed the door gently. Back downstairs, I moved conversations away from housing and toward harmless topics. Recipes, the weather rolling in from Marsh, art fair next weekend. Southerners can talk about anything but the thing that matters. I used the skill as a shield. Meanwhile, my mind began labeling folders, keys, boxes, witnesses, timing. When the last guests left and the porch light clicked off, the house exhaled. I gathered glasses, stacked plates, and walked the quiet rooms. The guest room smelled faintly of my mother's perfume. On kitchen counter, beside the sink, lay a second key ring I had not seen before, this one labeled only with a small silver star. I slipped it into my pocket with the first. At the front door, I examined the deadbolt. Tiny scratches ringed the keyhole, fresh and bright against the brass. The mark of a copy, or too many tries. I felt anger flicker and pass, replaced by something colder and steadier. In the living room, I opened my laptop and created folders. Access, occupancy, public claims. I pulled footage from doorbell camera, saved stills of luggage, and typed a note for tomorrow. Call locksmith, call association, print photos. Somewhere down the block, wind moved through live oaks, leaves whispering the way stories do when they are about to repeat themselves. I turned off the music and listened to the house. It felt solid. It felt like mine. Boundaries, I told the room, are not a debate. By morning, the house would answer back. The smell of wine and rosemary bread from the night before still clung to the air when I woke. It was one of those soft, bright Savannah mornings, the light filtering through the kitchen window in thin, gold lines. I padded into the hallway, half expecting to feel that easy satisfaction of having pulled off a lovely evening. But Zarel's suitcase was still propped against the wall, exactly where she had left it, an unspoken declaration. I stopped, my hand resting on the doorframe. She'd made no move to put it away, and I hadn't given her a reason to think it belonged here. That luggage sat like a dare. In the kitchen, while gathering the empty wine glasses, my eyes fell on a keyring beside the sink. A neat silver tag read Z's room. I didn't own a key tag like that. I picked it up, the metal cool and too heavy for just one key. A turn toward the front door showed tiny, fresh scuff marks circling the lock, marks you only get from a key that doesn't quite fit. I remembered the day last spring when my mother asked for my spare key, just in case. She had smiled that practiced, matter-of-fact smile, and I, trying not to seem paranoid, had handed it over. My neighbor, Mr. Lawson, had once told me, "In this town, a borrowed key is just an invitation to trouble." I had laughed then. I wasn't laughing now. I set the key ring in my pocket and went straight to my office. Pulling up the doorbell camera feed, I scrolled back through the last week. 2 days before the party, there they were, Romilly, Bastian, and Zarel, standing on my porch with a man in a polo shirt carrying a locksmith's case. The video caught my mother handing over a small, familiar brass key. He disappeared out of frame, and moments later, came back with a set of fresh copies. Bastian stood with his hands in his pockets, looking like a man waiting for a table at lunch. Zarel leaned against the railing, scrolling through her phone as if this was an errand they'd run 100 times. The casualness of it hit harder than the act itself. This wasn't improvisation, it was preparation. I sat back, my pulse slow but steady. I could call them now, confront them. But that would only tip my hand. They'd spin the story before I could get ahead of it. By late morning, the spin had already begun. My Aunt Carol called, her voice a mix of syrup and concern. "Honey, I heard you might have been a little tense last night. Your mom says she's worried about how isolated you've been." Before I could respond, my phone pinged with a cousin's text. "Family helps family. You have that extra room for a reason, right?" Another chimed in minutes later. "She's your sister, not a stranger." I knew this pattern. Romilly didn't waste time. She was already painting me as selfish, rewriting last night into a morality play where she and Zarel were the victims. A colleague once told me, "In some families, the truth isn't what happened, it's what gets repeated the most." And my mother knew how to repeat a story until even you began to doubt your own memory. I opened a new folder on my phone labeled Family Narrative and started saving every text. Screenshots, timestamps, caller IDs. I wouldn't argue with them. I'd archive them. By noon, I needed to speak to someone who wouldn't pretend this was all normal. I called Thane and asked if he had time for coffee. 15 minutes later, I was at a cafe 2 streets over, the one with the deep red booths and the reliable dark roast. Over steaming mugs, I slid my phone across the table, showing him the locksmith footage and the photo of the keyring. He watched without interrupting, his expression tightening. "Premeditated," he said flatly. "And stupid enough to leave a trail." I told him about the texts and Carol's call. "They're building pressure," I said. He nodded. "Don't push back yet." "You need a pattern, not a single incident. Every time they overstep, you log it. Dates, times, witnesses if you can get them." I took out a small leather notebook from my bag and began writing. 9:42 a.m. Keyring found, scuff marks on lock. 10:15 a.m. Reviewed camera footage, confirmed duplication of key. 11:00 a.m. Aunt Carol call, narrative framing. 11:05. 11:20 a.m. Cousins texts, family helps family. "Also," Thane added, "call the Townhouse Association. Ask about visitor access protocols. See if anyone's been fishing for information." I did just that from the booth. The manager's tone shifted when I asked if anyone had inquired about my property. "Your mother was in here last week," he said slowly. "Wanted to know about her access rights, said it was for your safety." I thanked him, ended the call, and looked at Thane. His eyebrows had gone up. "She's laying groundwork for more than just a stay." Leaving the cafe, I felt less like I'd had coffee and more like I'd sharpened a blade. If they wanted to play this as family politics, I'd play it as property law. That evening, I sat in my living room with only the hallway light on, deliberately leaving shadows along the edges of the room. My phone lay beside me, camera app open. Outside, through the thin walls and thicker stillness, I caught the murmur of voices. "The rest of the boxes tomorrow." Zarel's voice floated up the porch steps. Romilly's lower tone followed, too muffled to catch the words, but the rhythm was familiar, planning, not debating. I leaned back, breathing evenly. They were talking about logistics, where to put things, not whether. In my head, I rehearsed the only line I'd need. "You're in my house, but you don't get to own my life." The voices faded. I imagined them walking away, satisfied that their plan was moving. But the thing about satisfaction is, it makes people careless. The next time they crossed my threshold, I would be ready, and they wouldn't see it coming. By Thursday afternoon, I had almost convinced myself the unease in my chest was just fatigue. The grocery bags dug into my hands as I climbed the porch steps, the warm savanna air carrying the smell of azaleas from a neighbor's yard. I balanced the bags on my hip, turned the knob, and froze. The door wasn't locked. I know the weight of my own deadbolt. It's a habit. Twist, check, pull. This morning, I'd locked it. Now it turned too easily. Inside, there was music, light pop, faint but deliberate, coming from the master bedroom. I never play music in that room. My stomach tightened. I set the groceries down quietly and walked toward the sound. She was there. Zarel, standing by my dresser, sliding her makeup into the top drawer like she was arranging it for a magazine shoot. My navy bedspread was gone, replaced with a floral one in shades of blush and cream. Two of her lavender-scented candles flickered on the windowsill. I stopped in the doorway. "What are you doing in my room?" She didn't even flinch. "Making myself at home. Mom said it's fine." Before I could answer, Romilly appeared behind me, a stack of folded towels in her arms. "You'll like it better this way," she said, stepping past me like she owned the place. From the kitchen, Bastian's voice called, "Where should I put the heavier boxes?" I gripped the phone in my pocket. Any sharp words now would be ammunition for them later. Instead, I tapped the camera app and hit record, angling the lens so both women were in frame. Romilly spread the towels on the foot of the bed. "Doesn't it look warmer? Less cold?" Zarel laughed. "Finally feels lived in." I smiled thinly, said nothing, and walked out. Later, after I'd put the groceries away and the house had settled into that strange, false calm, my phone pinged. A Facebook notification. Zarel Kinton added new photos to the album Our New Home. My finger hovered over the alert before I tapped. There they were, shots of my living room, my kitchen, even my master bedroom, now wrapped in her floral prints and cluttered with her perfume bottles. In the captions, she thanked everyone who believed in her journey toward independence. Comments poured in. "So happy for you, Zarel. Looks perfect for you and your lifestyle." One from a mutual acquaintance read, "You deserve this space, girl." I felt the heat rise in my neck, but I didn't type a word. "Never wrestle with a pig," I murmured to myself. "You both get dirty, but the pig likes it." I screenshotted every image, every comment. The walls felt closer than usual, so I grabbed my jacket and walked down to the park. Spanish moss swayed overhead. Kids chased each other along the path. I texted Thane. "They've moved into my room, and they're posting about it like it's theirs." His reply was quick. "Keep collecting. Every reckless thing they post is evidence." At a copy shop, I printed the screenshots, labeling them by date. I started a fresh section in my logbook. Digital proof. On my way back, Mrs. Larkin from 2 houses over waved. "So your sister's moved in? That's nice. Bet it's good to have the company." I managed a polite smile. "It's something," I said, and kept walking. Back home, the guest room door was closed. My own bedroom door, now, was standing wide open, the scent of lavender drifting into the hall. Zarel's laugh carried from inside as she spoke into her phone. I sat at the kitchen table, spread my growing pile of evidence in front of me, and let my fingers rest on the edge of the first printed page. "They think I'll let this stand," I whispered. "They're wrong." The first move was coming, and it would look nothing like they expected. I was at the kitchen table, sorting through the growing stack of printed screenshots, when a knock sounded at the door. 3 short taps, then a pause. It wasn't the kind of knock a stranger used. I opened it to find Thane standing there, a to-go coffee in one hand, a manila envelope tucked under his arm. "You're not going to like what I found," he said, as soon as I stepped aside. We moved to the table, and he slid the envelope toward me. Inside were 6 printed photos. The first showed Zarel in my office, her back to the camera, rifling through the drawers of my desk. The next captured Romilly, standing in the hallway with her arms folded, angled just so she could watch the door. "When did you take these?" I asked, my voice even, but my fingers tightening on the prints. "Yesterday," he said. "I was dropping off that book you lent me. The front door was ajar. I didn't step in. I just took the shots from the porch." They were too busy to notice me. The photos were exactly what I had suspected was happening behind closed doors, but seeing them, my drawers open, my privacy stripped, sent a low burn through my chest. At the same time, there was relief. Finally, proof from someone other than me. "They're not even subtle," Thane added. "It's like they think they've already won." I looked at him. "You realize this makes you a witness." He met my gaze. "That's the idea." We spent the next hour going through my files. I showed him the logbook entries, the screenshots of our new home, the key photos, the scuff marks by the lock. He suggested setting up a secure cloud folder so everything would be backed up and accessible if something happened to my devices. If you let them control the story, they win before you even fight back, he said, leaning back with his coffee. I thought about the way my father's old friend used to talk about fights. You don't need to shout to win a fight. You just need to make sure the right people hear you. That voice echoed now, steadying me. By the time Thane left, I knew what my first public line in the sand would be. That evening, I installed the new high-security deadbolt I'd picked up earlier in the week, a brushed steel model with a reinforced strike plate, the kind that makes a solid click you can feel in your bones. I stood back, snapped a well-lit photo, making sure the lock and the new screws were clearly visible. In the family group chat, I typed, "All locks have been changed. Entry without my permission will be treated as trespassing." I attached the photo and pressed send. It didn't take long. Romilly. Cruel doesn't even begin to cover this. Zarel. Overreacting much. A cousin I barely spoke to anymore. Are you serious about this? I read each one carefully and set the phone down without replying. The message wasn't an invitation to debate. It was a notice. Later, Thane texted, "How'd it go? First step done," I replied. "Let's see if they take the bait." I went through the house, locking every window, checking the sliders twice. The phone alerts were set. Any motion at the front or back would ping me instantly. For the first time in weeks, I felt the faint hum of control returning. My folder of evidence was thickening, my witness list had a name, and the locks were mine again. This was the start of Phase 2. The night wore on quietly, but quiet in my family is never surrender. It's strategy. I wrote one last line in the log before bed. Lockdown initiated. Waiting for their move. Just past midnight, I woke. At first, I thought it was part of a dream, but then I heard it again. Slow, deliberate footsteps across the porch. My phone chimed with the motion alert. I turned to the feed and saw a shadow move just outside the camera's frame, lingering. My pulse steadied. I'd been expecting this. "So it begins," I whispered. And this time, they weren't coming with words. They were coming with tools. It was the metallic scrape that woke me. Soft, irregular, but purposeful. I know the difference between a branch brushing the porch and the sound of a key twisting in my lock. This was deliberate. I reached for my phone on the nightstand and opened the doorbell camera feed. The image came into focus. Zarel standing on my porch with a man in a work shirt, a locksmith's kit open beside him. She was leaning in close, whispering and gesturing toward my lock. Then, from just out of frame, Romilly's voice, low and certain. "She'll get over it once it's done." I took a screenshot, then started screen recording, making sure every second was preserved. My first instinct was to call the police, but a cooler thought held me back. First, I wanted them to know I was watching. I walked softly to the front door and spoke through it, my voice clear. "You're on camera. Leave now before I make the call." The locksmith froze mid-turn, looking at Zarel. "This your place?" he asked. "Yes," she said without hesitation. "I'm just locked out by my sister." I cracked the door an inch, enough to show my driver's license in one hand and my property deed in the other. "She doesn't live here and never has," I said. "You're about to break into a house you have no right to enter." The locksmith's expression shifted immediately. "Sorry, ma'am, I didn't know." He started packing up his tools. Romilly's voice sharpened. "Some family loyalty you have," she muttered, "running to drama instead of solving things." They stepped back from the door but didn't leave right away. Through the peephole, I watched them stand on the sidewalk, heads close together, speaking in low tones. Then they walked off into the night. I texted Thane, attaching the video. His reply came within a minute. "That's your smoking gun for intent." I logged the event in my evidence file, noting the time, 12:17 a.m., and every detail I could remember. The night went still again, but the silence felt staged, like the pause between acts. In the morning, over coffee, I sorted through the stack of mail by the door. Halfway down, my fingers stopped on an envelope from the electric company. My name wasn't on it. Zarel Kinton. Address, my townhouse. Shock gave way to clarity in seconds. They weren't just trying to get inside, they were building a paper trail. A utility bill is one of the simplest ways to claim residency in court. I took high-resolution photos of the envelope and the bill inside, then called the utility company, masking my voice as casual. "Hi, I think there's been an error on my account," I said. The representative put me on hold, then came back. "That account was switched to a new name 3 days ago, requested by a family member. Is there a problem?" "Yes," I said evenly, "and I'd like a written statement of that change and the date it was processed." "Certainly," she replied. "I'll have that mailed to you." By the time I hung up, the anger was cool and sharp. This was no longer about intrusions or disrespect. It was an active attempt to erase my legal standing in my own home. I opened my laptop and drafted a formal email to the utility company, copying Daniel, my lawyer contact, stating that the change was unauthorized and demanding immediate reversal. I attached photos of my deed, the fraudulent bill, and my ID. Next, I emailed the Townhouse Association, detailing the midnight locksmith incident and the fraudulent utility change. I asked that both be added to the property file. In my journal, I wrote, "They're not just crossing boundaries, they're building a fake paper trail to erase me." I replayed the camera footage from the night before, finger hovering over the share icon. Part of me wanted to post a 30-second clip online, time-stamped and clear, a quiet message that I wasn't an easy mark. Thane's text came in before I could act. "Hold off. The more rope they take, the more they hang themselves." I closed the app. "If they want war," I muttered, "I'll choose the battlefield." Late that evening, my phone buzzed with a group text from Romilly. "Family meeting tomorrow at 6, non-negotiable." Attached was a screenshot of the electric bill with Zarel's name, captioned, "Proof she lives here now." I stared at the screen, pulse steady. They thought this was a power play. I was already thinking about how to turn it into an ambush of my own. If they wanted a showdown, they just booked the wrong venue, my house. By 5:30, the main room was exactly how I wanted it. Lamps angled to avoid glare on the camera lens, chairs arranged so I could see every face without turning my head. The small device tucked discreetly on the bookshelf was already recording, but I made a point of placing my phone on the coffee table, screen glowing with a visible red dot. If they wanted to put on a show, I intended to keep the footage. I ran through my mental playbook, rehearsing answers to the accusations I knew were coming. They'd try to paint me as ungrateful, unstable, cold. The key would be to keep my voice steady, my phrasing tight, and never give them the raised tone they were looking for. At 6 sharp, the front door opened. Romilly swept in first, perfectly put together in a navy blazer, Bastion just behind her with his usual silent bulk, and Zarel trailing, her chin lifted in defiance. Their confidence was performative. Every movement said they believed they were walking into a courtroom they controlled. "Evening," I said evenly, gesturing toward the seats I'd set up. No one sat right away. Romilly's eyes flicked to my phone on the table. "Recording us now?" she asked, feigning amusement. "Transparency benefits everyone," I replied. They settled in. I heard my friend's advice in my head. Let them perform. Every word is a gift when the record button's on. Romilly opened her bag and pulled out a folded newspaper. She spread it with a flourish on the table so the headline faced me. "Local designer brings style and vibrance to historic district home." There was Zarel's photo, standing in my doorway, smiling like she'd just cut the ribbon on a personal dream. "Isn't this wonderful?" Romilly said, her voice warm enough to melt butter. "The community's so excited to have her here." Bastion nodded. "We're proud." She's finally getting the recognition she deserves. I kept my expression neutral. At what point did the paper verify legal ownership before printing this? Zarel gave a dismissive shrug. "It doesn't matter. I'm living here. They wanted to feature the new energy I'm bringing to the neighborhood." I made a mental note. Add article to the false claims file. Interesting, because it does matter to anyone concerned with the truth. Romilly sat back, smiling thinly, and for a moment the room went still. I decided to change the tempo. Without comment, I reached for my tablet, tapped the screen, and turned it toward them. Footage from my interior camera played. Zarel in my office, testing keys in my desk drawers, then pulling a slim metal tool from her bag to jimmy open the locked filing cabinet. Zarel's face froze, color rising in her cheeks. "I was looking for spare batteries," she said quickly. I let the pause stretch before answering. In a locked cabinet containing my financial records? Romilly leaned forward, tone sharpening. You're overreacting. Family borrows things. That's normal. Taking documents from a locked cabinet isn't borrowing, I said evenly. It's trespass and theft. Bastian shifted in his seat, clearing his throat but offering nothing. The air felt heavier, as if everyone realized the line we were now standing on. I leaned back. Here are my boundaries. You don't enter my home without my explicit permission. You don't claim residency here. You don't touch my property. Romilly's eyebrows arched. You sound like a landlord evicting tenants. We're your family. We're here because you're shutting everyone out. I let her words hang, then pointed again to the footage paused on Zarel's hand in my drawer. I respond to actions, not titles. On cue, Thane's voice came through my phone speaker. He'd been listening quietly from his office. For clarity, he said, Eldora's evidence shows multiple unauthorized entries and property interference. These are actionable offenses under Georgia law. Romilly's jaw tightened. So you're hiding behind lawyers now? I'm protecting what's mine, I said. There's a difference. They exchanged glances, the easy performance faltering. Romilly smoothed the newspaper with deliberate care, but the earlier confidence had drained from her face. I'll follow up in writing, I said, standing. Meeting's over. No one moved at first. Then Bastian rose, muttering something under his breath, and Zarel followed, shooting me a look I'd seen in grade school when she'd been caught breaking the rules, half defiance, half calculation. Romilly was last, brushing past me without a word. The door closed behind them, and the quiet that followed was almost startling. I sat down again, replaying the cabinet footage, saving copies to 3 different drives. My phone buzzed with a new email notification. The subject line read, "We're not done here." The preview text, "If you won't play nice, we'll have to take other steps." I didn't know it yet, but those other steps would come crashing through my front door sooner than I imagined. 2 days after the so-called family meeting, I was halfway through organizing my desk when the phone rang. Unknown number, local area code. I answered with my usual clipped, "This is Eldora." "Miss Vennick, this is Laura from the fraud department at South Coast Bank. We're calling to verify a loan application we received in your address." My fingers went cold. "Loan application? In my name?" "In the name of Zarel Kinton," she clarified. "She listed your property as her current residence." I kept my voice steady. "What date was the application submitted?" "Monday morning," Laura replied. "Type of loan? Personal? Unsecured? Amount? $20,000. Application was submitted online from a residential IP address in Savannah." Romilly's house flashed in my mind like a road sign. I pulled my notebook closer, writing every word Laura said. "Can you send me a written fraud report with the date, time, and IP address?" "Yes, ma'am. We'll get that to you." "Thank you," I said, and hung up. I stared at the half-filled page in my notebook, the ink still wet. A line from a legal podcast came back to me. Fraud loves a familiar address. It makes the lie look like truth. They weren't even trying to hide anymore. By mid-afternoon, the phone buzzed again. Thane's name lit the screen. "Have you seen this?" he asked, no preamble, and sent me a link. The page loaded. A GoFundMe campaign titled, "Help Zarel After Being Unfairly Evicted by Family." Goal, $5,000. Raised so far, $1,200. The cover photo was my living room, cropped to remove the visible family photos, but unmistakably mine. The description read like a tabloid article, claims of my emotional instability, how I'd forced her onto the street with no warning. Every word was bait for sympathy. Scrolling down, I saw strangers and a few acquaintances offering donations and scolding me in the comments. Family doesn't treat each other like this. Breaks my heart to see a sister act so cold. I took full-page screenshots of every section, making sure the timestamps and donor comments were visible. This wasn't just slander, it was a coordinated smear. By 4 o'clock, Thane and I were sitting in our usual corner booth at the coffee shop. I slid my phone across to him with the GoFundMe page open. "They've gone public," he said, scrolling. "That means you respond strategically, not emotionally." We mapped out the first steps. Report the campaign for fraud. Attach proof of property ownership, the locksmith video, and statements from the townhouse manager. At the same time, prepare for the legal implications of the loan attempt. Don't feed this yet, he warned. They're digging their own grave. You just need to keep collecting the dirt. I nodded, jotting notes. In my logbook, I wrote in block letters, the day they went fully public with their lies. On the walk home, I ran into Mrs. Larkin again. She waved from across the street, then crossed over, lowering her voice. Is that GoFundMe why your sister's been so upset? I saw her and your mother handing out flyers downtown this morning. I swallowed the irritation. I have my side of the story too, I said evenly. And the right people will hear it. Inside, I went straight to my printer. Every screenshot, every fraud report, every letter from the bank, printed in duplicate. One set went into the evidence binder, the other into a manila envelope I would store in my safe deposit box. I'd already arranged for Thane to keep a copy of the digital folder. The act of locking those envelopes felt like fastening armor. If they wanted to fight in public, I would fight in facts. Just before dusk, the sound of multiple car doors shutting broke the quiet. I checked the camera feed. Romilly, Zarel, and Bastian were walking toward my porch with two men I didn't recognize. One carried a clipboard, the other a briefcase. They weren't just bringing trouble this time, they were bringing reinforcements. When I opened the door, the sunlight spilled over Romilly's tailored suit like she'd stepped off a stage. Behind her, Zarel clutched a large canvas tote, Bastian carried 2 stacked boxes, and 2 unfamiliar men trailed close, one with a clipboard, the other hauling more boxes like he'd been told this was a legitimate move-in. Romilly didn't wait for pleasantries. We're moving her things in properly today, she announced, loud enough for the street to hear. Zarel brushed past me with a calculated flick of her hair, already angling toward the hallway. I stepped sideways, blocking the narrow space between the console table and the wall. The man with the clipboard gave me a vague nod. I'm just here to help facilitate the move. Facilitate? I repeated. Then show me the legal documentation authorizing entry into my home. He glanced toward Romilly. She smiled faintly. We don't need paperwork, Eldora. This is family. No one enters without my permission, I said, planting my feet. A moment of silence stretched, thick as tar. Then, Romilly gave a small smirk and lifted her hand in a subtle signal. Zarel tried to edge forward again, and Bastian adjusted his grip on the boxes. Across the street, a familiar figure emerged. Morven, my neighbor, holding her phone aloft and already recording. I caught her eye and gave a small nod, letting her know to keep going. Zarel dumped her tote onto the couch, unzipped it, and began placing her things on my shelves as if she were staging for a home tour. Romilly directed the 2 men toward the guest room. You can start in there, she said. Bastian offered a half shrug. Just family helping each other out, he muttered. I pulled out my own phone and hit record. This is Eldora Venick, I said clearly into the camera. It's Thursday, 2:14 p.m., and this is an unauthorized entry into my home. The dual lenses, mine from inside, Morven's from the curb, made this more than a scene. It was evidence from 2 angles. Put those boxes down and leave, I said to the movers. Zarel straightened. I have a right to be here. My stuff is already in the house. I pointed toward the side table where my deed and ID sat in plain view. Ownership is solely mine. There is no lease, no permission, no rights granted to you. Romilly shifted gears instantly, turning toward Morven. She's abandoning her family when we're just trying to make sure her sister isn't homeless. Does that sound right to you? Morven didn't respond, just kept her camera trained on them. You can tell whatever story you want, I said, but any further entry will be documented and prosecuted. One of the movers glanced at the other. I'm not getting paid enough for this, he muttered, already backing toward the door. That was my cue. I dialed the police, pressing speakerphone so every word could be heard. This is Eldora Venick. I'm reporting a trespassing in progress at my residence. There are 4 individuals in my home without consent, attempting to move property inside. The dispatcher asked for descriptions, and I gave them. Romilly's navy suit, Zarel's white blouse, Bastian's work boots, the clipboard in the stranger's hand. And, I added, There is video proof from multiple angles. The tone in the room shifted the moment the dispatcher said, "Officers are en route." Romilly's practiced poise wavered. Her smile faltered. Zarel bent toward a box. "Fine, I'll just take this back out." "That stays," I said, stepping between her and the door. "Until the police document it." Bastian muttered, "This is going too far," under his breath. Romilly shot him a look sharp enough to cut glass. In the distance, faint but growing, the wail of sirens threaded through the warm afternoon air. I stood at the threshold, my body a barrier, as Morven continued filming from the curb. The movers set their boxes down on the porch and stepped fully outside, clearly done. Romilly and Zarel exchanged a quick glance, wordless but telling. They knew they'd lost control of the moment. The sirens grew louder, blue lights flickering against the townhouse windows. And as the officers stepped out of the patrol car, I knew this was the day the tide began to turn. The house was unnervingly calm the next morning, sunlight spilling across the living room as if nothing had happened. But I knew better. Quiet in my world was just the space before the next push. I brewed coffee and sat at the table, replaying Morven's footage from yesterday. Every angle, every word, backed up what I'd told the police. I saved 3 copies, one to the cloud, one to an encrypted drive, and one to a thumb drive I tucked into the bottom of my desk drawer. A soft knock interrupted my routine. When I opened the door, my niece stood there, a small backpack over her shoulders, chewing on a straw from a juice box. My cousin waved from the driveway. "Just for an hour, Eldora. I have to run an errand." Inside, she wandered to the couch and began flipping through a magazine. Out of nowhere, she said, "Grandma says this is Zarel's house now, and you're just staying here." The words hit like a cold slap. I kept my tone light. "Oh." "She said that?" "Uh-huh." She went back to her juice, completely unaware she'd just handed me verbal proof of the story Romilly was feeding the family. The moment she left, I wrote it down word for word in my log. That sentence was going in my evidence file. By early afternoon, the phone rang again. It was Mr. Holloway from the Townhouse Association. "Miss Dvenik, I thought you should know. Your mother filed a formal request for emergency family access to your unit." My pen froze mid-note. "When?" "Last week," he said. "Claimed you have unpredictable mental health episodes and family needs to check on you." I swallowed the burn in my throat. "And you approved it?" "No," he said quickly. "It sounded off, but I wanted you to be aware. Could you send me a copy?" Minutes later, the PDF landed in my inbox. Reading Romilly's words in black and white, fabricated concerns, painting me as unstable, was more infuriating than hearing them secondhand. I forwarded it straight to Thane with the subject line, "New ammo." 2 hours later, I was in Thane's office, a thick binder of evidence on my lap. He scanned the request, his jaw tightening. "Between this and your niece's statement, we can link the false narrative directly to a legal maneuver. That's gold." "What's our next step?" I asked. "A cease and desist to both Romilly and Zarel for defamation and harassment. We make it clear the next move will be in court." We drafted it together, firm but professional, citing each documented incident. Then he suggested we quietly share certain proof with family members who'd stayed neutral. "Shift the middle ground before they poison it," he said. By the time I left, I felt something I hadn't in weeks. A tilt in the momentum. The letter went out that evening. By the next morning, my phone was buzzing with reactions. One cousin texted, "I had no idea about the mental health thing. That's awful." Another called to apologize. I believed her. I shouldn't have. Romilly, predictably, went the other way. She posted a vague Facebook status. "Betrayal from within is the hardest to forgive." Zarel shared it, adding, "Some people twist innocent acts into drama." I didn't respond. Every word they posted was another line in my harassment timeline. I added screenshots to the log, labeling them by date. That evening, an email pinged into my inbox from the Community Association. Subject, clarification on residency and ownership concerns. Attached was an agenda for next week's meeting. Under new business sat a single explosive line, Unit 14 dispute, my address. If they wanted the truth to be public, I was ready to give them more than they bargained for. 2 days after that email from the community association, I sat across from Thane in his office, a slim folder between us. We'd gone over every detail 3 times: what to show, what to hold back, how to keep my voice even no matter what Romilly or Zarel tried. The folder held my strongest pieces: the property deed with my name alone, the utility bill fraudulently switched into Zarel's, the bank's report confirming her failed loan application using my address, still frames of her and Romilly entering without permission, and the access request where Romilly lied about my mental health to try to get keys. Keep it clean, Thane reminded me. Facts first. Don't give them a single emotional outburst they can latch onto. The evidence will do the work. I nodded, thinking about something my grandfather used to say. It's not about proving you're right. It's about proving the truth exists outside their story. Morven had agreed to be there too, ready to confirm the video footage in front of everyone. Knowing she'd be in that room steadied me. When I walked into the clubhouse that evening, the air felt thick. Every seat was taken. Neighbors, board members, people who weren't even on the street but had heard enough gossip to come see it settled. Romilly and Zarel were already there, speaking animatedly to 2 board members, their hands moving as if they were telling a heroic story. The chairperson called the meeting to order and went down the agenda until we reached Unit 14 dispute. Romilly rose first, her voice warm, her delivery polished. She spoke about family unity and helping a sister through a difficult period, omitting every inconvenient fact. Zarel chimed in that she'd been peacefully cohabiting and just wanted understanding. A few heads nodded in the audience, and I could feel the tilt they were hoping for. When it was my turn, I walked to the front, laid my folder on the podium, and opened it slowly. I am the sole legal owner of Unit 14, I began, holding up the deed so the room could see my name in bold print. This is not opinion, it's recorded fact. I slid the next page out. The utility bill addressed to Zarel, the bank's fraud report attached behind it. These documents were used to fabricate a residency claim in my home without my consent. Morven stood when I cued her, raising her hand. I personally recorded this video, she said, and the board projected it onto the screen. Gasps rippled as Zarel appeared on the feed, working at my filing cabinet with Romilly standing guard in the hallway. Finally, I read from Romilly's own access request. Due to her unpredictable mental health, we need emergency family access to check on her. I looked up. This is what was told to the board in an attempt to get keys to my home. Silence. Even the people who'd nodded at Romilly earlier shifted in their seats. There is only one homeowner here, I said, my voice steady. Any further attempt to enter my property without permission will be met with legal action. I closed the folder, stepped back, and thanked the board for their time. The chair cleared his throat. The board will issue a written statement clarifying ownership and denying any future access requests not made by Ms. Vennick. This matter is considered closed at our level. On my way back to my seat, several neighbors leaned in to whisper apologies. I believed the wrong story, one said quietly. Romilly stormed out before the meeting adjourned, Zarel trailing behind, muttering about calling our lawyer. Hours later, a knock at my door delivered a certified letter. The return address was a local law firm, one I knew specialized in civil suits. Inside was a notice of intent to sue me for emotional distress and defamation. I read it once, then set it on the counter and dialed Thane. Looks like they just chose their battlefield, I told him. Good thing I already own the high ground. The next fight wouldn't be in a clubhouse, it would be in a courtroom. The morning of the hearing, I met Thane outside the courthouse steps. The cool Savannah air had the faint scent of rain, and the building loomed in front of us, columns tall, stone-worn, as if it had seen every sort of lie and truth pass through its doors. Thane handed me a coffee, and we went over our final points. The lawsuit was as ridiculous as it was malicious: emotional distress and defamation. Our counter was simple: facts, dates, proof. Thane's voice was even as he reminded me, stay factual, no sarcasm, let their words collapse under their own weight. I'd organized my exhibits with military precision: property deed, utility bill fraud report, trespassing videos, screenshots of the GoFundMe campaign, Romilly's falsified access request. Morven's witness statement sat in its own folder, along with one from the townhouse manager. I kept telling myself that my role wasn't to win a shouting match. It was to show the judge that the truth existed outside of their spin. Inside, the room was smaller than I'd expected, but packed. Romilly and Zarel sat at their table with their attorney, whispering quickly before the judge entered. I sat at ours, my folder closed, hands folded over it like it was a shield. The plaintiff's attorney opened with a story spun for sympathy. Zarel, the displaced sister, locked out without warning, left with nowhere to go. Zarel took the stand, voice trembling just enough to sound rehearsed. She said she'd lived with me for months, that she came home one day to find the locks changed. Romilly followed, testifying about my emotional instability and presenting the access request as if it had come from concerned neighbors instead of her own pen. They offered photos from the Our New Home album, selective shots meant to suggest a shared life in my house. I watched quietly, noting every inconsistency. Photos supposedly taken during her residency showed furniture I'd only purchased weeks before. Dates didn't align with their own timeline. When it was our turn, Thane called me to the stand. The oath felt heavier than I expected, but my voice was steady as I answered his questions. I laid out each document, explaining how it directly refuted their claims. Then I played the trespassing video, the locksmith on my porch, Zarel directing him while Romilly's voice coached from off-screen. Gasps echoed in the gallery. The next clip showed Zarel breaking into my filing cabinet, Romilly in the hallway like a sentry. Morven took the stand next, confirming she'd filmed the entry from across the street and that the footage was unedited. The townhouse manager followed, testifying about Romilly's denied access request and the false medical claims she'd made. Finally, I presented the utility bill in Zarel's name and the bank's fraud report, tying them to her attempt to fabricate legal residency. The murmur in the courtroom was almost physical, like the collective shift of people realizing they'd been fed a performance. The judge called a brief recess. When we returned, he wasted no time. The lawsuit was dismissed with prejudice. Romilly and Zarel were ordered to pay all my legal fees. Then came the part I hadn't dared to hope for, a 2-year restraining order against both of them, with strict no-contact provisions and a $5,000 fine for harassment and fraudulent claims, split between them. Any violation of this order, the judge said, will result in immediate arrest. I nodded once, meeting his eyes, and sat down. Romilly leaned toward her attorney, whispering sharply, her expression tight. Zarel stared at the table, refusing to look my way as they gathered their things. Outside, the sun was high, and the courthouse steps seemed less imposing than they had that morning. A reporter stepped forward, microphone in hand. Miss Vennick, any comment? I shook my head, but leaned just close enough for the camera to catch my words. Boundaries aren't selfish, they're essential. Thane grinned as we walked away. That's your headline right there. My phone buzzed before we reached the sidewalk. A text from an unknown number. This isn't over. They'd lost in court, but I knew better than to think they'd stop trying to win in the shadows. 2 weeks after the gavel came down in my favor, my house was quiet in a way that felt almost unnatural. No slamming doors, no shouted accusations bleeding through the walls. Just the low hum of my refrigerator and the occasional creak of the old wood floors. Still, the peace carried a brittle edge. My phone showed a string of blocked calls from no caller ID, and I'd received 2 anonymous emails with phrases vague enough to skirt legal consequences, but clear enough for me to know who sent them. I wasn't rattled. I was deliberate. Every day I reviewed the restraining order's terms, tightened my routines, and treated my home like a fortress. Thane had said it best over coffee earlier that week. The best time to end a war is when the other side is still pretending they can win. So, I scheduled the locksmith. By late Friday afternoon, a small team arrived with boxes of sleek, matte black hardware. The system they installed was more than just a lock. It was a fingerprint scanner, an encrypted code panel, and a log that timestamped every attempt at entry. Only 2 prints would open it, mine and Thane's. When the old lock came off, I set it on the counter and looked at it like an artifact from a battle long over. The new lock clicked into place with a satisfying finality. It wasn't just security, It was a statement. The era of shared keys and family entitlement was over. The email arrived at 4:13 p.m. It came from an account with no name, just a string of numbers. "We're not done. We'll get what's ours, one way or another." I didn't reply. Instead, I forwarded it to my attorney and added it to the evidence folder on my desktop. At 7:42 p.m., my phone buzzed with a doorbell alert. I opened the live feed to see Romilly and Zarel on my porch, luggage at their feet, the same smug posture as if the court order had been a mere inconvenience. I pressed the intercom button. "You are violating a restraining order. Leave now." Romilly tilted her head at the camera like she was talking to a stubborn child. "This doesn't have to be like this. We're family." Zarel skipped the pleasantries, jabbing the biometric scanner with her finger, then slamming her palm against it when nothing happened. "You think you can just lock me out of my own house?" "It's not your house," I said evenly, the red recording light on my phone blinking in the corner of my vision. They stayed for 6 more minutes, long enough for me to record every threat, every demand, before the patrol car rolled up. The officers took one look at my phone and nodded. "Clear violation," one said, turning to Romilly and Zarel. Romilly's voice rose. "This is harassment. She's—" "You can explain it to the judge," the officer cut in, cuffing her wrists. Zarel muttered something under her breath about payback as they guided her down the steps. I stood in the doorway, hands clasped loosely in front of me, saying nothing. The new lock gleamed beside me, unreadable and unyielding. When the cruiser pulled away, I texted Thane. They just wrote the final chapter for us. The next morning, I made the final changes. Every old code, every spare key, every hidden access point, they were all erased or replaced. My home security app showed a clean slate. I stood outside my front door, pressed my finger to the scanner, and listened for that crisp click. Inside, the air felt lighter somehow. I walked through each room slowly, letting my eyes rest on the spaces that had once been battlegrounds. Now, they were just mine again. "You don't just reclaim a house," I murmured to myself, remembering a line I'd once read. "You reclaim the space you hold in your own life." The restraining order, police reports, and court verdict went into a heavy-duty safe in the hall closet. I labeled the folder, "Closed." On the kitchen counter, I placed one of the old brass keys in a small picture frame. It wasn't nostalgia, it was a reminder. That evening, I poured a glass of wine and settled into the backyard as the sky shifted from gold to deep blue. The cicadas were loud, but not intrusive. Just life going on. Thane came through the back gate, 2 glasses in hand. "To peace you built yourself," he said, clinking his glass against mine. I smiled. "To never letting anyone tear it down again." We sat without speaking for a while, the air cooling, the night stretching easy and unthreatened. The story of Romilly and Zarel would fade into the murmur of neighborhood gossip. I knew people would still talk, but their words no longer had a key to my door, or my mind. For the first time in years, the only person holding the keys to my life was me.